Seeing more than a century of service, the Miranda class is a versatile, adaptable, and long-serving class of starship which has long surpassed its designer's intentions for the ship, and indeed, even outlived its designers by several decades. With a length of 238 meters, width of 142 meters, and height, with rollbar fitted, of 58 meters, the original light cruiser was compact for its day, having a much smaller profile than the contemporary Constitution II class heavy cruiser, though the Miranda actually massed substantially more. Optimized around prolonged service in the frontier, the Miranda was fitted with significant cargo and shuttle bays, as well as multi-mission spaces that could be configured to suit the vessel's specific needs with relative ease at any starbase. This was not to suggest that the vessel was poorly armed. In fact, at the time of its commissioning, USS Miranda was one of the most combat-capable vessels in the fleet, matching the original configuration Constitution-class heavy cruiser in weapons output, though only for brief periods. The ships were armed as standard initially designed, with 10 phaser banks, 6 twin and 4 single, and, if mounting a roll pod, also possessed 4 photon torpedo tubes and a modest magazine. Initially capable of speeds as high as warp factor 9 in the old scale, the numerous refits, reconstructions, and variations performed on the Miranda hull has seen this speed increase significantly with time, with modern Dominion War destroyer variants having a cruising speed of warp factor 6 and a top speed of warp factor 9.1 for brief periods. Development for the Miranda class began with a design brief issued in 2267 to replace the then-current Leander-class cruiser, a stablemate of the Constitution-class cruisers which, although fine ships when first constructed, had proven somewhat cramped and sub-ideal for modifications into further construction variants. Taking the idea to heart that the proposed Leander replacement have more room for future technology and variation for specific local conditions, the Andorian Gimber-classy shipyards took a hard look at technologies either recently developed or else projected for deployment in the future, and thought about ways to include the ability to have it retrofitted aboard their design if called for, when preparing their design brief. One of the technologies they paid special attention to would be those developed for the Great Experiment, as the Excelsior project was then known. Gimber-Classy, a leader in compact reactor technology, was heavily involved in the project at this early stage and had substantial knowledge of the planned power plant and nacelle designs for this ship, as they existed at the time. Anticipating that this would be the way forward, the design team provided their vessel with the ability to have Excelsior-style transwarp drive fitted aboard at a later date once it had been proven aboard the Excelsior. This decision leading to the development of the iconic slab-style nacelles later used aboard the Constitution-class program, and at the same time forcing the ship's torpedo tubes to be mounted externally on a roll bar, or not at all, as there was no longer room aboard the ship to host both the larger-than-average reactor spaces and photon torpedo tubes and their associated magazines. Gimber-Classy would have their design selected to enter the next stage of testing, being ordered to prepare a functioning prototype alongside the Tellarite Boktai yard and their submitted Intrepid class in 2268. Both ships would then compete in a series of tests, trials, and evaluations, from which Miranda would emerge the victor and be ordered into production. Miranda-class vessels began entering service in 2269, with large numbers of the class quickly entering service from 2271 onward, as the Cold War and arms race with the Klingon and Romulan empires ongoing in the period was heating up at the time, with all parties rushing as many ships into production as possible in an effort to gain an advantage. The Miranda quickly proved its worth, with several components of the class even used in other classes introduced in the period, such as her nacelles, torpedo launcher, and sensors, which would be used on many classes of cruiser, destroyer, frigate, and scout ship throughout the 2270s and 80s. In fact, so ubiquitous would these components be that it would give all Starfleet classes introduced in the period before the Excelsior program a very distinctive look. Due to its lower cost but comparable firepower to the larger Constitution II heavy cruisers, the Mirandas were built in very large numbers, the ships also being much more modern than the Constitution, at least on a basic level, also influencing this decision to favor them over the ostensibly heavier Constitution. With the success of the Excelsior project in the late 2280s, after many delays, Starfleet suddenly found itself with a marked advantage in the speed and firepower of its fleet. An advantage of one, but nonetheless a significant advantage. Wishing to make the most of their major technological and capability lead over the Klingon and Romulan empires, and also knowing that it would take time to bring new Excelsior-style classes into service, Starfleet looked around at what vessels in its fleet could make best use of the tech proven by Excelsior. Naturally, the Miranda class would quickly be found to be capable of accepting the new generation of reactor designs, thanks to the work of Gimber Classy-Yard when designing the ship. With a refit program being developed in 3 months' time which would make all existing Miranda-class vessels capable of similar performance, where speed was concerned, to the Excelsior class. The new reactor and associated drive systems would be installed on all new build Miranda-class hulls. Rushed into even greater production levels, many more Miranda-class ships would be commissioned over the 2290s, being found to be cheaper to build and operate than the new Centaur-class frigates commissioned to fill the same roles the Miranda was used for in the period. As the new century dawned, it was quickly found that the class was too small to serve in the light cruiser role it had initially been built for. A series of refits would see the ships transformed into frigates and destroyers, often termed the Miranda II and III, and these would be the roles the class would be serving at the time of the dawn of the 24th century. Over the next several decades, the multitude of Miranda-class ships would find themselves subjected to repeated rebuild and reconstructions to suit different roles within Starfleet, though many members of the class would be repeatedly refit to serve the role of destroyer, often in favor of a proposed newly built replacement class due to cost concerns, as well as the general peaceful environment the Federation found itself in during this period. Finally, a concerted effort to replace the Miranda in its various roles would be made in the 2360s and 70s, as the basic structure of the ships began to wear out and be unusable due to such a long service period many of the ships had lived. With classes such as the California, Sabre, Norway, Nova, Steamrunner, Mediterranean, Olympic, and Sarat classes all being developed to replace various Miranda refits in different roles. Indeed, many members of the class would find themselves decommissioned and placed in reserve during the 2260s. This surplus of disposable, aged hulls would have a number of uses proposed, though nothing would make any headway until the Borg presented themselves as a potential threat. A program being put in place to convert Miranda hulls into unmanned, remotely piloted weapons platforms to aid Starfleet in future engagements against the Borg Collective. The program would be just beginning when the Borg attacked the Federation in the Battle of Wolf 359. None of the drone Mirandas participating in the action, though several manned, fully commissioned members of the class would find themselves engaged in the fight with the Cube, often with disastrous results for their crews. The program would, however, be kicked into high gear in the aftermath of the battle, as Starfleet prepared for the next encounter with the Collective. As a result, many members of the class would be converted by the time of the Dominion War broke out, seeing much action as part of the leading edge of many Starfleet task forces, and fighting in some of the bloodiest battles of the war. Once damaged beyond the possibility of immediate repair, a Miranda drone was simply stripped of anything useful and discarded by the fleet. Post-war, only a few holdouts of the once numerous class remain in anything approaching active service, mostly as patrol vessels in isolated systems and regions. And even then, their remaining time on active duty is likely to be brief. And it may be that by the dawn of the next century, all members of this long-serving and adaptable class have been finally withdrawn, ending a storied career with Starfleet stretching back well over a century. While lambasted today as a death trap, a relic, and a ship long past its sell-by date, the Miranda has given good and long service with Starfleet, thanks to its sturdy, easily adaptable design. Though with the numbers of the ships still in service dwindling rapidly, the days where the Miranda is a ubiquitous, omnipresent sight in the Federation may soon be a mere memory. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, consider subscribing to the channel for more like it in the future. This month I am doing a series of videos exploring the Miranda class, its variants, and the history of the filming models in the real world. So if that interests you, consider subscribing for that reason as well. Also, if you really do like this channel, then consider subscribing to my Patreon, linked in the bio. Or description. Yeah, this is an Instagram. It's description. This will help the channel improve and give you a say in what content you see in the future. You can also freely criticize me for saying bio on a YouTube video when it's clearly just description. I can't even say that word. Anyway, regardless of what you do, hope you enjoyed the video. Have a nice day.